And so I think the U.S. is going to work very hard, especially given the political pressure now, to make sure that these individuals are not traveling, certainly out of Qatar, and to some degree are constrained. But that's going to be very difficult, and the Qataris in some ways have demonstrated sympathies with some of these groups and members. Keep in mind that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the key al-Qaeda leader, once lived in Qatar. I think you've seen some Taliban political and diplomatic members reside in Doha and Qatar and make their lives there. And so it's altogether possible that these gentlemen decide it's pretty comfortable. They have enough freedom to operate, enough freedom to communicate with their Taliban comrades out of Qatar and decide not to leave. In part, it's relatively safe there, as opposed to traveling back to Afghanistan or even Pakistan. But there's no question there should be concern as to what happens after the year mark, if they're given the freedom to travel back into Pakistan, back into Afghanistan, or even worse, to serve as emissaries of the Taliban elsewhere to raise funds to build political capital for the Taliban. That's a potential here, and I think that's problematic. I think the U.S., if it's doing its homework, will be looking very closely at the activities, the communications, the fundraising of these individuals. And as with the case of other detainees who've been released from Guantanamo, there will be an attempt to track their activities and to at least constrain them if possible. If these guys decide to re-enter the fight, rejoin activities that are tied to known terrorist groups and activities, then the U.S. has an assortment of tools to use to include arrests or in the battlefield actually killing these individuals if they're engaged in lethal activity. So I think the U.S. will do its homework, try to monitor as much as possible. The challenge, of course, is once they're out of our custody, they're out of our control. I think in general what you've already seen from the Taliban is a warm reception. These are high-level Taliban commanders and officials dating back to the mid-90s. And so these are premium Taliban prisoners who will be welcomed back with open arms into the network. Whether or not they'll assume immediately a commanding post, I think, will be very interesting. And that's a different question because the Taliban has obviously evolved over time. It's a bit more fractured than in the past. And there are other leaders who've taken a prominent role in the Taliban's campaign in Afghanistan, as well as some of the activity in Pakistan. So whether or not they'll be able to jump right back into some sort of commanding role that mimics what they were doing in the past, I think is a different question. It may take some time for them to integrate back in. But without a doubt, they are going to be seen as key Taliban leaders that are brought back into the fold and at a minimum are going to provide political and fundraising value to the movement, if not then operational value.